Hi, everybody. You are tuning in to the Trietsch podcast. This is part of our series Reality Check, and today is Ask Doug Anything. So, unlike our other Ask Fill in the Blank Anything episodes, this one is going to be centered around mental health as a response to our upcoming worship series that starts this Sunday called Reality Check, where we're going to take a deep dive and start conversations around the impact of mental health, bullying, and school violence. So I would like to encourage you to visit tmumc.org/realitycheck, where we have extra resources and you can see all of the upcoming events around this series. And just as a reminder, you are welcome to comment with questions, and Doug will answer those questions live.
Absolutely.
Yep, he's going to be coming.
I'll try to answer those questions.
He will try.
Yeah.
We're going to be coming at mental health from a spiritual perspective, since we've got a pastor with us today. But before we begin, I just want to say that I really wish that these topics weren't as relevant as they are right now. With the mass shootings that happened this weekend in El Paso and Dayton, now more than ever, we do need to be having conversations around mental health, bullying, and violence, and it needs to be more than just conversations, and we need to find ways to take action, to listen to each other. So I hope that you really jump in and start this dialogue with us, because it's so needed.
Absolutely. You know, we talked earlier about a couple of different things. Just the irony that this series has actually been planned for months, and how unfortunate the timing is, I guess, right? Of how the events propelled a lot of us into just this familiar land. You know, one of the things that came to my mind was here we are again. And you can look at a litany of times like this that go on and on and on, and we continue to come back to kind of what I think are throwaway phrases. I don't think they're always meant to be, but we're going to hold people in our thoughts and prayers, but that doesn't always move the needle.
Right.
We're going to talk some about the things maybe that bring people to that point, but we're not going to get into a whole bunch of political mishmash. But as people of faith, I think we all are wondering, okay, so here we are again. What can I do? I posted on Facebook today, just like this real practical reminder, you can go give blood. Do something. I need to do something physical. So like this Sunday at church, we're having a blood drive. You can go tomorrow somewhere and give blood. Write a letter. Do something. Go over and knock on your neighbor's door and say, hey, I need to probably know you better. And do it not out of a suspicious nature, but out of a, you know what, we're all here trying to do life. Maybe we all can do life a little bit better. So our hearts are heavy, and we're trying to figure out, so what's next? And Alyssa and I tonight are just going to jump in the pool. We're neither one doctors. You're not a doctor, are you?
No, not a medical doctor.
No, I'm not either. I like to tell people what to do, especially my family, my wife. But so our answers are going to come out of reflections out of our heart, and we're going to try to be really vulnerable. And so I'll admit that's a little scary, but we're going to give it a try.
Yeah. So with that, I realized that I did not introduce us. My name is Alyssa, and I am the digital strategist here at Trietsch, and help produce and put on these podcasts. And this is Reverend Doug Meyer.
Very reverend.
Yes, who is our associate pastor of Caring Ministries, and all of that great pastoral knowledge. So
well, we'll see about that.
So our first question, how do you think mental health is viewed in our culture?
Wow. You know, I think it is, it's a big old ball of twine. It is this go-to, for instance, like right now. And so why did this person do this? Oh, they must be crazy to shoot up all these people. They must have a mental health issue. So we dogpile on mental health, which only furthers like the stigma, right? People who have mental illness issues are different than me, and I don't have to be around that. We also kind of merge together mental health and mental illness. They're not the same thing. They share they're kind of like sisters that hold hands, or brothers, or whomever, friends. They're related, but mental health is just as important as physical health and spiritual health and emotional health. And sometimes on that continuum, situations arise that you find yourself getting mentally ill. And most often, you had absolutely nothing to do with that, right? So it's almost like the dumping ground of things we don't know how to explain right now. We say, oh my goodness, they must have mental health issues. Because what it also does is it helps differentiate you from me. If I can say you have a mental health issue and I can then push you away, I feel actually kind of better about myself. It's weird. We're doing some weird stuff with that right now.
So talking about how it's viewed in our culture, what about in the church? Church with a capital C,
Yeah, universal.
Universal church. How do you think mental
Pretty
health
much
is viewed?
like the world. Every now and then we will do a little more empathy and we'll go, oh, bless their hearts. Oh, we're going to pray for you. But what that prayer is in part is, I'm really glad that you're at your house and not mine. The only times it kind of penetrates into the culture of a local church is when the leadership of a local church comes to understand it in up close and personal ways. Primarily that's the pastor or associate pastors, or people who have a voice in front of people and then choose to acknowledge it and be vulnerable and transparent and say, hey, at our house we're wrestling with this. And what that does is that throws wide open this door of people who are shocked and then say things like, oh, can we really talk about that at our church pastor? And in reality, the pastor is hungry to find a setting where he or she can talk about it. And so church isn't really that much different than the world. We just, find ourselves in settings every now and then where we're maybe more inclined to be honest. But certainly we don't have the corner of the market.
So my next question is kind of making an assumption that there is a stigma around mental illness.
You think?
But my question is, why do you think that there's a stigma around mental illness unlike physical illness?
Well, mixed together, shame, fear, ignorance, and indifference. And kind of like I said a minute ago, if I can identify or label you as different from me, and here's the reason, then I feel better about me. We don't really understand it, so that's ignorance. Indifference is, I'm only going to worry about it when it comes to my house. Fear comes when we see horrible things and we label everybody who does this as having mental illness. And then shame comes out of either family history or personal story that says, hey, you're not supposed to talk about that. We don't ever talk about Uncle so-and-so or Grandma so-and-so or even your own story. So you mix all that together and we stigmatize and we can kind of hold out in a way. And all that contributes to just this continuation of misunderstanding, of ignorance.
Yeah, but I do think that the conversation is changing. The fact that we're willing to have these conversations, was this happening 20 or 30 years ago where
Right.
there was a public dialogue about mental health? So
Sure.
How do you think that the conversation about mental health is changing?
Well, I think we are an example of change. The very fact that tonight in a Methodist church in an affluent community in North Texas is doing a podcast in which two people go on live and talk about the story and maybe their story. And it encourages people to go, oh, wow, maybe we can talk about that. I also think that one of the great things about the internet is we're awash with information and resources. And so you can learn more. One of, I think, people's favorite ways to learn about like serious things is to go on the internet because it doesn't necessarily require that you self-identify. And so you can find out about depression or schizophrenia or paranoia or any of the other, laundry list of mental illnesses and be moderately anonymous without ever having to identify with your doctor or caregiver or anything like that. So And then I think maybe, I wish I could think of like who the mental illness pioneers were who said, hey, we're going to talk about this. Like, there had to be somebody, maybe like even Robin Williams, somebody who talked about their depression. And who predated that? So if you're watching tonight and you know the answer to this, let me know. Because there had to be a pioneer like 25, 30, 40, 50 years ago who said, hey, I'm struggling with this, and I'm okay.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and David has commented and has a question. He says, mental health issues make me uncomfortable. What can I do to get past that? He said, medical issues don't bother me, and I can go visit someone in the hospital, but if I know someone is suffering with mental health issues, I'm uncomfortable or unsure of how to visit and support that person. What do I do?
Well, yeah. Acknowledge that. Tell somebody, and then sit with it, and just either do a little bit excavating on your own and go, wonder why this makes me anxious. Is it tapping into a previous experience or a family story? Or, when we don't know stuff, we make up stuff. And so maybe you got your own stuff going on about you already figured out what mental illness was about and what, quote, crazy people were about. And so if you make up a story, then you also make up the answer to the story or the question. So maybe the most challenging thing would be to do some stuff to get to know people who have come out, so to speak, with mental illness struggles.
So, you've brought up a couple of times sharing your personal story. What's your personal connection to...
I'm not going to talk about it.
You have to.
I have to, I know. So I'm in this really squeaky chair, and I'm really self-conscious of that at the moment. So part of my story is about depression. And but I was telling Alyssa earlier that I had this little memory moment this afternoon when I was thinking through tonight, and I realized that as a kid growing up, I was super active in the youth group in a little church outside of Houston. And one of our volunteers had what my parents called was a nervous breakdown. And she was super close to the group, and so 3 or 4 of us drove into downtown Houston, and we got permission to go see her. And she was in what I would call just this classic psychiatric unit, where you had to get a nurse to escort you up the elevator, you had to go through a series of locked doors, and then everybody, I just remember this very white room with tables, and she was kind of escorted out. I make up maybe that she was heavily medicated, but I think that I hung on to that memory and attached that to ignorance. I guess if you have a mental illness, this is what happens to you. All right, so fast forward. I had a series of depressive episodes, I guess you'd call it, because they went away at times. Like I had a really big one my senior year in high school. I remember in the spring just being kind of paralyzed by, holy crap, I don't know what I'm going to do with the rest of my life, and you want me to decide what I'm going to do with the rest of my life? And I just got this, I have this vivid memory of like going to the choir room and sleeping in the choir director's office because I didn't know any other way to just deal with it than to sleep. I had one in college, and I don't remember how that story ended. Then I had one as a young dad. By the year, I'd been married 5 years. We had 3 kids. One of them had a really serious chronic illness that was both very serious and very expensive, and I felt very inadequate to provide and supply, and I couldn't fix him. And got really depressed. And my wife, that time, kind of invited a good friend over, and they kind of, I guess you would say, did a what's the word? Intervention. And I was very, very resistant. And looking at it now, I look back and I think, well, why were you resistant? And it was probably out of fear and ignorance. Like, I should be able to fix this. I should be able to be bigger than, better than, stronger than, and that somehow you would think less of me if I got, named that. So I started seeing a therapist and a psychiatrist, got on antidepressants, started feeling better. I got so much better that I quit taking my medicine and didn't really quite understand antidepressants. So I got off of them and started going right back there. I went through that cycle 2 or at least 3 times. And the very last time, I had just a heart-to-heart with my physician who said, it's okay that you take these the rest of your life. And I had such a clear memory of the heartache of being depressed that I just said, you're right, I'm in. And so you mix that with family members and other people really close to me who have suffered with depression, church members who I have been with who have had other similar episodes or breaks. And I don't know, the thing I learned is one of the very best things you can do is just talk about it. That I've never been in a room, and I don't think you're going to do this tonight, where anybody's like run out of the room with their hair on fire and said, oh my God, I can't believe you're, like that. And matter of fact, just the opposite's happened. People have come up to me and said, thank you. I remember once at my last church at St. Andrew, I preached about it, and I had a note the next day from a lady who said, I've never been in a church where I could talk about or heard my pastor talk about being depressed. And I've struggled with depression for years. Thank you. And it's those little moments, those little attaboys or whatever you want to call them. So,
do you think that there's an expectation? I'm going off script now. This is not a question you were prepared for.
okay.
Do you think there's an expectation of one of the reasons that it's hard to talk about it in the church is because we're not supposed to be depressed because we have Jesus. We have God. We have faith. You're not supposed to feel those feelings. Do you think that's part of the stigma within the church environment?
Yeah. No, I think so. I think there's a lot of sideways applications of being a happy Christian. In that if you were strong enough, you could pray it away. And if you were super happy and you trusted Jesus more, then it would all be okay. And then you have people who say crazy things like, well, this is all part of God's plan for your life. I think that's nuts. But, and so you probably have that running sideways. You have physical symptoms that are going on. No wonder people don't ever talk about it because they're confident. There's a whole slew of people out there ready to judge them and say, well, you're probably not Christian enough. Yeah.
So do you think that, one of the things that, as you were going through your story and talking about when a depressive episode has come on, it seems like it started out of a place of anxiety.
Yeah.
And this Sunday, we're talking about anxiety and depression and how they're tied together. How do you see those two things being tied together?
Sure. I think that makes sense. I think anxiety has come for me out of times of unknowing or I like the phrase catastrophizing. When you imagine something and the only way this story will end is just with a nuclear-wide explosion or something. All of that feeds into this make-believe-ness in your mind, which then gives you all the more reason to just, give up. But I think there's a fine line between chemical depression and affective depression or seasonal depression. And I never made a choice. You know what? Today I'm going to be in a funk. Yeah. I never did that. So I don't know how all that brain chemistry works, but I'm pretty sure that being anxious, whether it's every day or every hour, is a causal effect somehow in just throwing off the whole body chemistry. And, everywhere you turn right now, we live in anxious times. But everybody doesn't end up depressed. Yeah. So somewhere in there's a differentiation between people who have anxiety and it's a doorway to depression, and people who have anxiety and it's a doorway into exercise or whatever.
Yeah. So what do you think that we can do as a church to be supportive and proactive when addressing mental health and mental illness?
Talk about it, preach about it, A couple years ago here at Trietsch, we started talking about addiction and talked to a couple different people whose best advice was you need to use the language of addiction in sermon illustrations and in just creating it as a part of the vocabulary of your culture. And so I make up that that's the same thing that we need to do with mental health and mental illness struggles is when a person hears a pastor use that as an illustration, in a way it kind of normalizes it. It gives it permission to be spoken. And you only speak of things in church that are okay to speak of in church. It kind of goes back to some of that weird church and God and faith stuff. And so if your church leadership, your senior pastor, I think specifically, named it, talked about it, whether from their own story or of other people who gave it credence, I think that can begin to change
and
it.
maybe if you're in a church that this conversation isn't happening, to feel empowered to go to your senior pastor, associate pastor, and say, this is something I'd really like for us to start talking about.
Yeah. I can remember a couple years ago, in a series of a year or two, we had some really heartbreaking, well, it's always heartbreaking, suicides here. And people would come out and talk about, hey, we really need to do something. We need to figure out a way to be more connected. And we didn't do anything except probably pray for the people. And I don't think that was necessarily wrong. I just think we didn't know better. We don't know what to do. And perhaps now we're just a little braver. I don't know. I think you gotta. People are hungry to have permission to talk about what's scaring them and what's hurting them. And what better place maybe to do that than here?
Yeah. So our reality check series is really focusing on kids returning to school, especially teenagers who are facing mental health, bullying, school violence in a way that previous generations never even thought about. Is there a message that you want young people to hear as they return to school?
Yeah, I think more than anything, go learn. Just jump in there. I say that maybe naively because maybe there's some people who are even afraid to go back to school. But go learn. But also have over here this place where you can go, like parent, guidance counselor, best friend, teacher, who you can say, here's how I'm feeling today. And I think it's really incumbent upon them that they listen to feelings and not just say, hey, get back to class. But in my mind, like every kid has a team, kind of like their coach and their assistant coach and their trainer who say, you can do it. I'm there with you. Whether I'm there physically or not, I'm with you. And throughout the day, if you have an anxious moment, just visualize me or think of us having this conversation. I think maybe one of the worst things we can do to kids is just not let them verbalize anxiety. And I make up that we probably don't want them to verbalize it because it makes us anxious too. As a parent, we're pretty nervous about sending our kids into this vulnerable place. And you turn on the news and you see stuff and you think, okay, I need to hold them close to keep them safe. Well, I don't know what all the statistics are, but they're going to be safe. You got to take a risk. You got to go let them learn and go and be and grow up and learn things like problem solving and resilience.
Chris has the question, have people who have heard you speak publicly about your struggle with depression approached you to open up about their own?
Yeah, the lady I talked about at St. Andrew has. I've had people who here at Trietsch who have, there's kind of an interesting dance. They come in and first they kind of like, are you sure it's okay that we talk about this? And sometimes it's their story, sometimes it's their spouse, sometimes it's their kid. And for the most part, it's just they're testing their wings. They've never been in a place or in a relationship where they can say those words out loud. Hey, I think I'm depressed. or I think my friend is depressed, or I think I get a little nervous because I'm not a doctor and
Yeah.
I can't and don't want to try to diagnose. So usually, almost immediately, I say, "Hey, we can listen, and I can tell you my story, but you got to see a doctor, or they need to go see a doctor. They need to see somebody medically trained." But I think there's all sorts of stuff that they could and we all should be looking out for. So, yeah, big time.
So, David asked, what can we do if we know someone who is acting dangerously?
Yeah. I think we confront them about it. I think that what's there to lose by calling that out? It seems like there's so much more to lose by not calling it out. If it's a trusted friend, take them to lunch and say, I'm having a hard time understanding some of the choices I see you making. You know, I don't think you get into a whole bunch of accusation stuff, but I think you just own what you can of that story and make them I statements. And I care about you, and I'm confused right now. I see you isolating. I see you, sleeping all the time or being this or that. And I don't know. And I think today with that story about the grandmother who saw her grandson going through all this, and he began hoarding ammunition and weapons and making these statements. And imagine the strength it took for that grandma to call the police and say, "I think my grandson's not well." Gosh, that's super hard. Because more than likely, it's somebody you really love and care about.
Yeah.
I think you got to call it out, don't you?
Yeah. I mean, of course I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also think that knowing what you don't know is very valuable, and understanding that I'm not a person to give advice, and I'm not a person who understands the deep
That word.
whatever the word is,
Yeah.
intricacies of mental health and brain development, and how chemical imbalances in the brain can affect your actions. Like, that is not something I'm an expert in. And so I think on top of being there and calling it out and being willing to listen, also having a network of experts that you can direct them to, or that you can go to yourself and say, I'm struggling with this situation.
Yeah. I think that, let's say it's your son, daughter, husband, wife. I think you have to get over your own fear of whatever this is about to be or not be, and just say, the things I'm seeing worry me. Can you help me understand it? Can you help me understand your choices? And, I don't know what's the barrier. Is it that we're afraid they're going to flip out or do something, or what, right? Well, so if you imagine that for just a minute, like, so I don't want to talk to you about something I see you doing because I'm so afraid that you're about to do something crazy. That right there should be a sign that fear has some legitimacy. That I'm so afraid of your reaction that I'm not going to do anything.
Yeah. So Chris has another question. How do we make it safe for our children to talk about being bullied? Because that is often what leads to depression.
Yeah. Well, depending on the age of your kid, I think you talk about it. You give illustrations of maybe at your house. You talk about constructive ways to respond. They hear the word so much, depending on their age. They talk about it at school. They talk about preschool. There's TV programs. There's books. I think the main thing our kids need is permission to be who they are. And then permission to have their own strong voice. And so my strong voice meets your strong voice. How do we deal with that, right? I didn't do this. I wasn't this intentional as a parent growing up, but it almost feels like at night or on occasion there needs to be like debrief times at home where you name something and you just wonder out loud, wonder what might be a good way to deal with that. And help them problem solve, because if you tell them always how to fix it, they're not going to learn how to fix it.
Well, and I think I empathize with the question because I was bullied in middle school, and I did not let anybody in. I did not talk about it. And there were plenty of opportunities to. My parents would ask me questions at the end of the day and would ask me how I'm doing and ask me about my friends and all of these things. And I was being bullied constantly by my closest friends. And, Enneagram, going back to personality types, my personality type is under stress. I withdraw and I go and seek strength within myself. And my parents didn't know until I was close to graduating high school that I was bullied, because I never opened up about it. I never talked about it. I wanted to deal with it myself. And even though the resources were made available to me to talk about it, I chose not to. And so that's not necessarily supposed to make you feel better, parents, but sometimes I just don't think you can beat yourself up over it. You can put every opportunity out there, and your kid might still choose not to take advantage of the resources, because I didn't.
Yeah.
I wish that I had. Looking back on it, I think that my, early teenage years would have been a lot easier if I was more willing to open up and be vulnerable and talk about being bullied. But for some reason, I just did not see that as an option. I saw it as weakness if I did that.
I totally get that. When I was, so I know y'all are going to find this hard to believe, but in high school, I was like Mr. Band, Mr. Music, Mr. Kind of academic nerdy guy. And I got picked on and bullied by, actually, it's interesting you say that, like some of what I would have thought were my best friends. They were at least neighbors. I remember one situation where I got off the bus once, and this guy I knew really well came and just slugged me upside the head and called me a really ugly name. And I was so overwhelmed by it, like I was kind of ashamed that had just happened to me. And so I don't even know that my parents knew. It happened in our front yard. And I went in and I never, ever spoke of it. So I don't understand why sometimes the bullied inherit the shame of being bullied, when it should be the bully that feels some shame for being a punk.
Well, and David asked the question, Alyssa, how did you handle it? What did you do to get through it? And the truth is, I didn't handle it. I chose to ignore it, and I chose to shut myself down. I chose to keep people at a distance.
Yeah.
I chose to not let people close to me moving forward, because I had been betrayed by the people closest to me in my very formative years. And as a result of that, I didn't have a ton of close friendships. I chose to keep people at a distance, and my family was my fortress. And then outside of that, people saw me as a much closer friend than I saw them for most.
So did you keep
it.
those people at a distance because you were afraid of taking the risk of letting them close?
Yes.
Because you had been, that
because
trust had been violated?
I had let people in and let people be close, and they betrayed me.
And look how that turned out. Yeah.
And they hurt me, and it was a horrible feeling, and I didn't want to open myself up to that again.
Sure.
And so
it's
actually been a really long journey for me, and I didn't even see how much of an impact that's had on the way that I interact with people and the way that I define relationships until about 6 months ago, when I started taking the Enneagram class and better understanding my personality and how that formed. But I consider myself to be a pretty healthy person, and I'm in a pretty good place. But even at the age of 31 now, you old lady. Well, no, even at the age of 31, thinking about the bullying that happened to me from the ages of 12 to 14, it still hurts.
Sure.
And it shaped me in a lot of ways.
I think we do that with those formative experiences. We kind of we tuck them away, and if possible, they'll just dissolve or go away. We really don't give them any conscious thought, right? That we're going to have to go back and open that and look at the hurt or the fear or whatever. And then somehow, though, they seem to, they don't dissolve. They take up residence.
Yeah.
And it's not until we kind of begin to do this like soul excavation or something that we go, oh, wow, I hit something hard. I wonder what that is.
Yeah.
And we keep digging at it, and then we open it and go, oh, crap, I wish I hadn't opened that.
Well, and for me, there was a very distinct moment that I thought that I had moved on and that I had forgiven, and I was like, oh, that's behind me, until I was probably 22 or 23, and one of the girls who used to bully me tried to friend me on Facebook. And it was in that moment that I realized I am not over it. I was like, no, we will not be friends. But I thought I had forgiven. I thought I had let go. And then as soon as I see that face pop up, those feelings come back all over again. And I realized, no, I didn't ever deal with it. I didn't ever dive into it. I didn't confront it. I just ran away.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And in a way to go. Because that's kind of a... as hard as it is, like I love the metaphor of like doing therapy as excavation. Mm-hmm. You know, like archaeologists are digging through and they're finding stuff, and you can take it out and set it out and go, oh well, that's really interesting. What can I learn from that? Mm-hmm. You know, because like I know in my life, I spent the first 40 years digging holes and putting stuff in it and not looking at it, thinking, well, that's going to go away.
Yeah.
Or just out of sight, out of mind. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't really go away. It's like somehow it has to be, we have an opportunity to dig it up and name it and go, okay, I'm okay with that.
And I think that another trap that I have fallen into before that maybe other people fall into is I think, man, like I don't deserve to have a pity party. There are so many people who have it so much worse than me. And why do I get to sit and feel sad when other people are literally starving to death around the world, you know? And
I have plenty to eat, a wonderful house, a wonderful car, friends, family, people who love me.
But that's just me creating another excuse to not deal with my problems.
Sure. Well, because that's, we feed the stigma out of our own fear, right?
Right.
And maybe if it works, if we can create this smoke screen, that then that's one more thing we don't have to get into in life. Yeah. But the thing I would encourage people to do is go there. Go to the place of the thing you're most afraid of and begin tapping at it. Begin doing the work. You're going to be amazed at like the kind of the revelation and the energy and the whole new you that, because I bet 90% of the stuff that you've layered it on is just irrational fear. That's Dr. Meyer right there.
We are not doctors.
And we do not play them on TV. Yeah.
So how do you think spiritual health and mental health are connected to each other?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I imagine that we're this mass swirl of stuff, right? And there's our emotional health, our physical health, our mental health, all these different healths. Mm-hmm. And the spirit within us also needs tending and nurturing, just like our mental health does. I think that they complement each other. I think when I am spiritually healthy, that I am more likely to be emotionally healthier and maybe mentally healthier. Now, we could talk for a whole other night about what's it mean to be spiritually healthy.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean being a good, young man or woman and saying you're a person going to church every Sunday. You can do that and be a spiritual mess. But I think that the God I believe in designed us in kind of this holistic manner, and is I really like in Genesis where Scripture talks about, and God breathed into us God's breath, that in me and in you there is some God breath that gives me identity. And I think that's what gives me meaning and purpose, and I think it does you too.
Well, speaking of Scripture, what does the Bible say about mental health or illness or bullying or these topics that we're going to be hitting?
Yeah, it says things, I think, around it. It talks about struggle, and it talks about fear, and it talks about darkness, and so you could draw some lines some presumptive lines, to mental health and to emotional health. It talks about, like in one of my favorites is the psalmist, where 46:10, he says, "Be still and know that I am God." So I think there is an importance in mental health that we take time to be quiet and we listen to the world around us. Philippians, Paul talks about don't be anxious. I think that this is where I struggle with this. So I can read that in the Bible and go, okay, well, that's a great goal, but just reading that does not make me not anxious.
I was going to say, easier said than done.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm feeling anxious. Oh, well, the Bible says don't be anxious.
Oh, well, why didn't you tell me that before? I wouldn't have spent all this energy being anxious. Somehow, someday I want to talk to Job, because I think Job had every reason in the world to be depressed, and he was probably bullied as well, because his friends kept trying to tell him to snap out of it. It's not that bad. You don't understand. So there are illustrations after another, because Jesus was great particularly Jesus, about using the human condition to talk about things. It just is not as black and white as Jesus saying, oh, let's talk today about, bipolar. Let's talk today about, borderline personality disorder. He just talks about the human condition, and the human condition is chock full of complexities.
Do you think Jesus knew about bipolar disorder?
No. No. Not the Jesus I believe in.
Yeah.
See, so that's going to open this whole thing about people who are going to say God knew everything, and maybe so. I don't know. I don't use any brain energy to worry about that.
Yeah. Well, okay. The last question that I have is, what is the worst thing to do when faced with mental illness in myself or in others? What is the worst thing to do?
Nothing. To do nothing. To talk yourself into apathy or fear. To isolate. It's probably like a combo deal, like a combo meal. Like, we're going to take some isolation, and we're going to add to it some shame, and then we're going to self-medicate, and we're going to drug away, eat away, shop away, sex away, to where we change that chemistry of how we were feeling. And then we'll probably deny it. Like when people who love us go, oh, how are you doing? Oh, I'm fine. We will create our own little lie loop. And all of that is to keep people what? At a distance. Because if they get too close, they will see that we're BSing and that there are cracks in our veneer, and we can't have that. And I think I make up that a lot of people who crash and burn, they can only keep that veneer going for so long, and then they just gas out. They just run out of energy. And that makes me sad. But in some cases, that's the doorway to getting better. Not always. Some people implode. But go to somebody you trust and say, I'm in a bad way. Your doctor, your pastor, your sister, your brother, your best friend. It's got to be somebody you trust, don't you think?
Yeah.
Because you've already created this big fear tape in your head about they're going to judge me, they're going to think less of me, I'm going to judge me, I'm going to think less of me. So you climb that mountain, you finally get to the top of it, and you go, I am desperate. I've got to talk to somebody.
Well, thank you so much for taking this time to talk with me. And everybody, I am really happy that we are doing this tough series called Reality Check, where we're going to be talking about all of these really necessary topics. Join us again. We're going to be here doing another podcast on Monday nights at 8 p.m. every Monday in August. Next week, we're having a mother and son come in and talk about it from that perspective. After that, we're going to have teachers come in and talk about what they're seeing as far as mental health in the schools.
Yeah, but wait a minute, go back.
Okay.
They're not going to talk about being mother and son.
No, they're going to talk about mental health and bullying and their different perspectives of that.
Okay.
And maybe about being mother and son.
And maybe the son moving away to college and the mother being really anxious.
Yeah, we're going to talk about all of it. And then, for our final week, we are going to have a panel of licensed professional counselors who do have the training and the understanding and can answer those questions about mental health in much more detail than we would ever be able to.
Oh, absolutely. And so between now and then, we want you to come up with really super hard questions for them, okay? Thank you.
Yes,
This
thank you.
This didn't hurt near as bad as I thought.
Oh, no, you did great.
And, I guess I can't stress enough how important it is that if anything we said tonight resonates with you, do something about it. Talk to somebody. Call Alyssa. Call me. Reach out. There's tons, and we're going to get into this more. Where will they find all that website stuff and those podcasts?
It is all on tmumc.org/realitycheck.
Yeah, we're putting out some great resources. You'd be, come on, the internet, it's everywhere. But in the next week or two, I'm going to talk about some of my favorites. So, and I think Alyssa has some as well. So, are we supposed to say good night now?
Yep, good night. We will see you on Sunday for week 1 where we will talk about anxiety and depression. So, we'll see you there and come ready to talk.
Absolutely.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.